This is To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning and welcome. Cities and counties across our community and the nation taking a hard look at their police departments after the killing of George Floyd under the knee of a police officer now charged with second-degree murder. Defunding police is a rallying cry for some protesters, and my guest this morning is West Palm Beach Mayor Keith James. Mr. Mayor, one of the rallying cries for some protesters has been defund the police. What does that mean, and do you support such a move?
Well, I don't support defunding the police in the sense that the semantics suggest. When you first hear that, you think of just decreasing or eliminating funding for our police departments, which I'm certainly not in favor of. I think as you drill down deeper into the conversation, what they really mean is reallocating resources, if you will, and maybe redefining some of the work, the scope of work of our police. For example, in the area of homeless, should our police be the primary body dealing with the homelessness problem? Should our police, law enforcement, be the ones dealing with mental health problems or substance abuse problems? So if you redefine their scope of responsibilities and maybe bring in resources, outside resources, whether they're fiscal or agencies, to take that burden off of the police. But no, I am not in favor of defunding our police. You know, it's interesting. When I get out in the community, sometimes the people who are crying the loudest for more policing and law enforcement are those in minority communities. They want the police. And so the challenge is for them to start viewing the police as allies and not adversaries in this battle.
How do we get to that place? And in getting there, do you agree with redefining some of the scope of their work as you just suggested?
Well, absolutely. And even in our city, we have been allocating more resources through the homelessness issue, for example. I've always felt that mental health is an area in which we need to bring in resources from outside law enforcement. Our jails and our prisons should not be the largest mental health hospitals in our communities. So I do agree with that we need to look at ways in which to bring in outside resources and redefine and narrow the scope. Now, how do we do that? How do we get to a point where those communities view the law enforcement as allies and not adversaries? It really begins with more aggressive and more active community policing. I'm very proud of the job that's being done in my city under Chief Frank Adderley. I think that we do a very good job of that, and we have to continue. And a lot of it is just conversations between law enforcement and the community so that they can understand and get on the same page with the public safety challenge.
What do you say to those who, despite the fact that protests were overwhelmingly peaceful, there were some moments of tension. Some of the protesters have complained there was undue rough stuff from police. What do you say to that ongoing discussion? You're hearing it. What do you say?
Well, you always want to do after-action reports, correct? And so we will continue to look at that. The major kerfuffle, I believe, was Sunday evening, and I got a call about 8:15 from my police chief who said we need to impose a curfew. My officers are under attack with rocks and bottles, et cetera. And so now there's been some disagreement as to what precipitated that. I still stand by the position taken by my officers that whether it was pepper spray or whatever it was, that the action that they took was prompted because there were some unruly agents in the demonstration crowd that started. You know, I don't want to sound like a teacher at a schoolyard play. Who did it? Who shot? Who hit who first? We will continue to look at that in the videotapes. But I believe our officers were under attack before they took more aggressive action. And if you look at the other demonstrations throughout the week, we did not have any repeat of those incidents.
Mr. Mayor, talk a little more deeply about your thoughts about changes that we need. So some protesters many argue that there's systemic racism in police departments and it needs to be ripped out, root and branch. Do you believe there's systemic racism in your department? And for those in the community who feel there is, how do you deal with that in terms of policy changes? And how, as you said earlier, do you bring police and their communities closer together if there's that ongoing suspicion and feeling?
I do not believe we have systemic racism in our department. Might there be some elements that need to be weeded out? perhaps. And again, I think it's important for leadership at the top, whether it's the police chief or me as mayor, to define to the rank and file what kind of culture, what kind of behavior will be acceptable. And so we have been working for years, and I'm proud to say there's a hashtag 8CanWait. There are 8 policy provisions that have been suggested as part of this conversation, eliminating chokeholds, mandatory de-escalation training, requiring warnings before shooting, requiring the exhaustion of all means. So there are like 8 of those. And I'm proud to say that our department has implemented all 8 of those policies. And again, Michael, just like anything else, it's going to require intentional, continued conversation. Now, that's just criminal justice. I do believe we have systemic racism and other factors and other walks of our community, which again is going to require intentional communication across all types. The thing that I'm most delighted by, to the extent you'll be delighted in this day and time, is the breadth and the diversity of those out on the streets demonstrating. This is no longer just Black folks who are marching. You've got whites, you've got folks you've got baby boomers, and you have millennials. You have Black, brown people. I think this is an inflection point in our country's history. People seem to get it. There was something that resonated with that videotape of a man, the police officer holding his knee on the neck of someone for over 8 minutes. And so I'm just hopeful that broader policy changes will result from all of this.
Do you want to see civilian oversight boards? They're talking about reenacting that in Miami-Dade County to our south. What do we have in terms of that structure, or what would you like to see, if anything, in terms of—
I'm not in favor of a civilian oversight board. I do believe in what I'm putting in place, and I've had discussions with the chief, is having a representative of my staff, someone who is who has experience in law enforcement, who would get involved and be my eyes and ears in any such investigation. Listen, the job of being a policeman, a policewoman is a very difficult job. And I don't think civilians can understand the subtleties of doing that. But I do think it's important to have a separate set of eyes and ears there to observe and to be a part of any investigation of any allegation of undue force.
What do you say, Mr. Mayor, to all the police officers extending on that comment, trying to serve the community, so many of them doing that every day with integrity, the overwhelming majority doing so with integrity and at great personal risk, who now say, we feel beleaguered too? What do you say to your police force?
Well, what I say to them is ladies and gentlemen, job well done. Hold your head up high. Our community needs you. And I've said in every public comment that I've made since these demonstrations started that I'm very proud of the work that our police force is doing here in West Palm Beach. I can't speak to what's going on in cities and other parts of the country, but I'm very pleased with the level of communication that I have with my police chief. I'm very pleased with the level of professionalism that my officers display on a day in and day out basis. And we are partners in making this community a safer community.
And what do you say more broadly to the topic, both locally and nationally, those who say, been here, done that? Those in the Black community say, whether it was Rodney King, whether it's Ferguson, whether now George Floyd, we've been here before, what will really change? Well,
listen, I am optimistic that this is different. As I said, when you look at the people who are out on the streets, there's a much broader array. And even, listen, if you look at pictures of demonstrations in foreign countries, in London, England, in France, this is an international movement that is happening. And then I look at maybe what some would say minor things that have occurred in the last week. Would you remove Confederate flags from NASCAR? And now I hear that we have a Black man who's going to be on Bachelor. There are some cultural changes that are happening here. But what I want to encourage, when I spoke to the demonstrators last week, this energy, this passion that you're bringing to protest this injustice, I get it. Bring that same energy and passion to the polls during election. Because I don't care what your policies are, what your policy recommendations are, if you don't have the right people in City Hall or in the State House or in the White House, those policies will not be enacted.
Mr. Mayor, final question for you, a response to President Trump's comments at a Dallas roundtable late last week. And I'm quoting here. He said, in part, "We have to work together to confront bigotry and prejudice wherever they appear, but we'll make no progress and heal no wounds by falsely labeling tens of millions of decent Americans as racist or bigots." And then he went on to talk about the need, in his words, to dominate the streets. He's talked about that, to deal with those who would loot and riot. Juxtapose those comments and your reaction.
Well, listen, if you start from a position that an assertion, an allegation of racism is based upon a faulty premise, that is wrong. 400 years of history. Black people have been here for 400 years. And I think just like in any other situation where there's been a human failing, you first have to look in the mirror and do an honest self-assessment. That's what our country needs to do now, is seriously look in the mirror and assess the history of race relations in this country. If you start from there, then we can have an open, honest conversation. But there's no need to be defensive. The facts speak for themselves. But I tell people, I don't care. We all came over here on a boat. You know, some of us voluntarily, some of us involuntarily. And in fact, there were some of us who were here to meet the boats. But the thing is, we're all on the same boat now. And that boat flies the flag of the United States of America. And we have to continue to be intentional about working to address the greatest ill, the original sin, as some have called it, which has been slavery. But let's be honest in our intention, and let's be very candid in our intention.
Mr. Mayor, we will leave it there. We will be looking in on the town hall you're holding virtually this week to discuss all these issues. As always, we appreciate your time. Thank you for helping to frame the issues for us today.
I'm happy to come back anytime, Michael. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
And just ahead, our roundtable takes up the upcoming elections and how they could play out in Florida. Stay with us.